talking to the former Health and Social Care Minister, Lawrie Hooper, there was me predicting it was going to be a fairly innocuous Tynwald with very little to report.
Yes, well, like I said, this isn't something I'm doing lightly, if I'm honest. We've been going back and forth over these issues for quite some time, and it's become apparent. I mean, it's even apparent to Mr Thomas, and he's made this remarks a few times, that my views on the future of healthcare on the island are very different to the views of the Chief Minister, and ultimately something has to give.
And some of the things you had to say were quite extraordinary. I mean, basically, you seem to think that the Chief Minister's ambition is to privatise the National Health Service.
That's kind of where I've got to, if I'm honest. Everything that's been going on the last few weeks, the last few months, around funding, around costs, it has become more and more apparent to me that every time we've gone in and said, look, this is the reality, listen to the experts, that's just been disregarded, and the inevitable consequence of that is, well, you have to cut services, and we're not touching our tax system, so if you want more money, we're going to have to stop paying for it. And that's kind of where everyone's at. And it was for that reason I took a paper to council last week asking them, do you believe in free at the point of use? Yes or no? It's not that difficult a concept to understand. And they didn't want to make that commitment. They didn't want to say, yes, actually, that's quite important. We'll stick with that. It was very non-committal, and that itself was quite worrying. But the biggest worry actually is what came next. Was we were talking about potential cuts. You've heard it all this morning. The government's position is very clear. Manx must come in on budget, and the reality of that means cuts to services, and the cuts that have been proposed so far are minuscule in comparison to the things that will need to be done in order to do what the Chief Minister is asking. And that was laid out to Council of Ministers, and there wasn't a moment's pause, there wasn't a let's take a breath on this and actually think, is this really the right direction? There was just an instruction to come back with a more detailed paper with the list of cuts, and I think that's the wrong thing to do.
It is, though, possible that Council of Ministers chose not to support what you were putting forward because they genuinely felt that the paper wasn't good enough and they needed more information.
It's absolutely possible that they decided that, but ultimately you're asking someone about a core principle, something that you believe in. Do you think that we should have a system like they have in, say, Ireland, where you pay €80 a night to spend a night in hospital, or where they have in Guernsey, where it's £400 to get an ambulance call out? Is that what you want? Or do you think, no, fundamentally healthcare is a right, it should be provided by the state, and if we have to fund it through taxation, so be it? That's fundamental. I don't think there's any, you could write that on the back of a napkin and say, what do you think? Ultimately, that's quite an important principle, and if you're not willing to stand up for your principles, then actually I don't think you've got any business being in government, quite frankly.
One of the things that ministers have to do occasionally is bite their tongue and just get on with it and work for the greater good of the people of the Isle of Man. Is that not something that you felt that you could continue to do for the next 2 years, to try and work with colleagues to find solutions?
I think it's fair to say I've been doing that for some time, actually. I haven't been speaking out publicly about my views. I have been fighting the corner inside the Council of Ministers. I've been fighting it in the room because that is the right thing to do. But the moment you want to speak publicly, you can't stay in. You have to resign. That's just the right and proper thing to do. But like I said just now to Tynwald, I'm convinced over the last couple of weeks, having brought in the Manx Care Chair and actual really experienced professionals to come and talk to Council about what this means and what the reality is, and the fact that they weren't listened to, it was that for me is it, well, actually, if I'm not being listened to in the room, if I can't convince people of the right thing to do when I'm in the room, then there is no point me being in that room. I'm not going to sit back and sacrifice my principles just to sit around that table. I'm sorry, but whoever comes in to do the job that I've just vacated, they're going to be given very clear instructions to go away and cut services, and I think I'm going to fight that with every fibre of my being, because I do not think it is acceptable. I know Manx Care's view on this. They don't want to be doing this. Their view is these things will put people at risk, and I don't think that's an acceptable position for the government to take.
Is this, though, not a similar picture across all the departments of government? Haven't all the departments of government got similar pressures and similar difficulties where services are going to have to be, or are being cut, let alone have to be cut? You got this extra £40 million. We all are paying 2% extra on the higher rate of income tax for the privilege of that better health service. So what What on earth has gone wrong?
Well, ultimately, the way that the funding has been allocated, and this came up a lot this morning, was never going to be sufficient. And we were always asking Manx Care to do a lot in terms of savings delivery, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with pushing them on that, and that's what we've been doing, and I've been doing a lot of. But the reality is, where we are is we're asking them to do too much too quickly. And that's the same across all of government, actually. And I think you're right, Phil. This is the tip of the iceberg. You're seeing it in health because we're quite open, quite transparent about the way these budgets are forecast, the way things are going. I would not be surprised to see other departments coming forward over the next couple of months talking about cuts and savings. And I don't just mean efficiencies. I mean, actually, we're going to stop doing things, or we're going to be slowing budgets down, or we're not going to spend money. That is not going to be, it would not be a surprise to me if that starts happening now, because I think you're right, all of government's in this boat. And the core issue behind all of this is, actually, as a government, we've never looked at the income side of the scale. We're always looking at spending, always looking at spending more money, doing more things. All that's great, but actually you have to pay the piper. And the reality is government has steadfastly refused to look at our tax system. We still have a tax cap for high net worths. People that are over 65 that work don't pay national insurance. The national insurance system itself is a little bit anachronistic and outdated. There are so many issues with the way we raise money, and so many ways it could be done better and fairer. And if we don't look at that, ultimately the end result is going to be, well, we've set an artificial cap on the money we can raise. That means we're going to have to cap public services. And in some areas, and Manx Care have been absolutely clear with us on this, they are at the stage where if you want to make big savings, you have to stop doing things that you can't salami slice anymore, as one of the board members put it to me. And that's the reality of where we're at. And if government isn't going to hear that message from within, they're not going to hear it from me, they're not going to hear that from the Manx Care board, then ultimately the only thing I can do is say, this is serious, you need to listen, please wake up. And resigning is the last thing I've got left in my armoury to help me try and get that message across.
Presumably, though, you would have known this back in February when the budget was announced, if you are correct and this is an underfund and not an overspend. So what's been happening over the last 6 months? Have you been having these conversations? Has Treasury been interceding and assisting Manx Care to try and help get a better grip on the finances? What sort of things have been happening?
So the short answer is yes. We knew this when we put our budget submission in last year. Just like this year's budget submission highlights a significant risk for next year, we have been completely open with Treasury and Council on this. And like you said before, a minister's job is to fight the fight and then hold their tongue. And ultimately, I had some hope that the budget, whilst it wasn't going to be sufficient, would at least be enough to enable us to make some changes, to demonstrate that change could be made. Even if I underlying, I thought, we're probably still not going to quite get there, but actually at least we're showing Manx Care that we're serious, and they can show that they're serious, and where we get to might be a £6 million overspend, not a £20 million overspend. So yes, we have had some of these conversations. In terms of financial support and extra resources, I wrote to the Treasury Minister a year ago last month asking for additional support in terms of finance governance, finance director, strategic planning, and I was told, no, you can't have that, you've got access to shared services. And a year later, when this stuff starts hitting the pan around about May time, Treasury have been now forthcoming, and they've tried to help us with, we've put in some financial, had a governance review, we've got people doing work for us, but it's a year too late. I asked for that help a year ago and was turned down, and now when the proverbial hits the fan, now they're willing to step in and help. But by this point, it's too late. You've already spent the money, you're already halfway through the year, you've already got a budget that's been set and is being spent. And that's kind of the problem here. It comes back to the core point that I've been saying this stuff for the whole 3 years I've been in council, and I have been fighting this corner for 3 years. Not alone, I might hasten to add, but ultimately we're in a position where the system isn't listening, and there is no other way of making people listen other than to say, this is serious, either you listen to me or you find someone else to do this job. And that's kind of the stage I've reached, and like I said, this was not an easy decision. Even up until half an hour ago I was thinking, am I really going to push the button on this, because there is so much good work going on across government. There's so much good work going on in health, in Manx Care, in education, in DEFA. There's a phenomenal amount of good being done, but I don't think all of that outweighs the significant risk that I can see, not just to the health service but also to our nation's finances if we proceed down this road.
You don't seem to have an awful lot of confidence in the Chief Minister in leading us out of this issue. Is that a fair assessment?
That is an absolutely fair assessment. Part of the problem is we're in this mess because of some of the things that the chief has pushed for, has publicly said. I mean, by way of an example, it was the 26th of September where Manx Care's chair and CEO and the chair of their finance committee came and briefed council on the seriousness of these measures and the seriousness of the impacts, and where they clearly stated, if you want to do this, there will be significant service cuts. 3 days later, the chief minister goes on the radio and says Manx Care have to come in on budget irrespective of demand. And that's the problem we're dealing with here. Is you can hear it from everybody. The Medical Society have said this is a bad idea. Manx Care have said this is a bad idea. The Department of Health is saying this is a bad idea. Well, ultimately he's cracked on and made public statements and public commitments irrespective of all of that weight of advice. Well, if he's not going to listen to the people that should know what's going on, I really don't know who he's listening to.
Perhaps he's listening to the people from across business, across all aspects of Manx life, who, following the Manx budget, said, what has happened to the Isle of Man government? Public finances appear to be completely out of control. Somebody needs to get a grip of this. Surely that's all the Chief Minister's trying to do.
I think if that were true, he would commit to the economic strategy, which talks about broadening the tax base. He would commit to the Island Plan that talks about investing in our infrastructure and our core services. I mean, if you look at it, just think logically, if we want an extra 5,000 workers, maybe an extra 15,000 people, we probably need a health service and an education service that are going to function. Well, we're telling you what the cost is today to deliver those services right now. And if you're not willing to spend the money today, how on earth are you going to be willing to spend the money tomorrow when all these other residents start turning up? And that's the core problem here. All this stuff was set out publicly in the Michael report. It tells you exactly what the future looks like. And actually, Manx Care are doing better than the Michael report forecast they would do. But that's where it set it out. And actually, we paid a lot of money for that report. It was commissioned by the Chief Minister, I believe, when he was in Treasury. So the reality is we know what the future looks like. We know we have to meet these costs, or we have to start cutting services, because we know it's a long-term journey where things will get better and will get fixed, but you need to commit to that long term, and you can't get jittery every time something doesn't quite go the way you were hoping it would go. There's even been a report last month in the UK, their OBR, Office of Budget Responsibility, has published a report that says categorically the growth in health term demand is 3% in real terms. That's their view, that actually you need to fund this at 3% just to stand still. And we're not doing that. And so we're not helping the system stand still. We're not investing like we said we would when we set up the Michael report. And that's where you get all of these debates about, well, it's not working. Well, actually, we did one half of the coin. We set up Manx Care. We gave them efficiency targets, which they've delivered on. And we've told them, crack on and deliver on these services. And they've done all that. What we were supposed to do was fix a long-term funding model for the health service. And that's never been done. We don't have one. We have a budget that last year popped taxes up by 2% because that was the best on offer. And I don't know what Treasury's long-term plan is. I don't know what's going to happen in February when the Treasury Minister brings another budget back. He says he's not going to raise taxes, but, that's today. He might change his mind in 5 minutes, because what other options does he have unless he wants to say, actually, we are going to start hammering service cuts, a slash and burn austerity approach, which, personally, I think is absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio Newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.